For our talk tonight, we've got Bhante Tejadhammo, and just to introduce this is the Association of Engaged Buddhists. It's a non-profit organization formed by a group of lay Buddhist practitioners and supported by an ordained Sangha as our spiritual director, Bhante Tejadhammo. We welcome all who think that they may benefit from learning and practicing meditation, who wish to find a different way of looking at life, or who simply are seeking for a supportive community within which to practice the Dharma together. We organize regular Dharma talks, meditation practice, and meditation retreats. We have a beautiful retreat centre at the Southern Highlands of New South Wales called Vejsala, where we hold our retreats, and Kainan Tan just finished his retreat there that was very successful. Very beautiful retreat. And there will be more retreats coming up soon, but nothing at this point, but keep your eyes on the AAB website to see for updates. We'll come to these talks. If you're looking for a community to practice and learn, we wish to be able to support you mentally and spiritually in a safe, caring, and supportive environment. If you haven't, please consider joining as a member and subscribe to our newsletter. As we are run solely based on donation, any generous support will be very much appreciated. All teachers are offering their teachings free of charge. So if you wish to offer dana to the teacher, you may contact us directly or make a donation through the website. Just indicate that it's dana for the teacher. For more information about our future events or how to support us, please visit our website and Facebook page, and I or Meredith will post the link in the chat later. So tonight, as I said, we've got Bhante Tejadhammo, and he has allowed me to read a brief bio. He is the spiritual director of the Association of Engaged Buddhists and senior resident monk at Sangha Lodge. Ordained in the Theravadan tradition, he has also studied and received teachings in Mahayana and Vajrayana. He has a background in Western philosophy and theology and is involved in interreligious dialogue via the Australian Monastic Encounter, AME. Bhante gives teachings and conducts retreats in Australia and works with people with life-threatening illness and prisoners in Sydney. So, with that, I will pass to you, Bhante. Thank you so much for leading us tonight.
Very good. Thank you. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Virupakehi me metang erapatehi me chabhyaputehi me metang kanagatam kehicha apadakehi me metang dipadakehi me chatupadehi me metang bahupadehi me mamang apadako himsi dipadako mamang chatupado himsi mamang himsi bahupado sabe sata sabe panya sabba buddha chakewala sabba badrani pasantu makinchi papang akama apamano buddho apamano dhammo apamano sangho Pamana Vantana Siring Sampani Ahivichika Satapadi Hunnanabihi Sarabu Musika Kata me raka kata me parita pati kamantu bhutani Sohang namo bhagavato namo satanang samma sambhutanang. So, that little chant is all about snakes. Hard to believe, isn't it? But it's true. When I first ordained as a monk, the very first morning we were to go on alms round, my teacher said to me the night before, now you have to try and learn this chant because we recite this in the morning as we leave for alms round. And you might know that the monks in the Thai tradition go on alms round when you can see the lines on the palm of your hand, when you can first make them out in that, there has to be that much light so that you can see it. And Thailand, of course, is a place that is absolutely full of all sorts of snakes. Cobras, vipers, adders, you name it, they've got them. And some wonderful, wonderful pythons too. So when Tanjo Kun explained the words of this chant, I thought, this is a bit weird, this is a bit strange. And then I thought, oh, it's very quaint, you know, chanting to keep the snakes away from yourself. Chanting to say to the snakes, I'm not going to harm you, so don't harm me. And so off we went in the early morning. It's still fairly gloomy. And I remember thinking, oh, I hope I don't run across any cobras or anything like that, because it wasn't all that easy to see. However, nothing ever happened. And we came back, and morning after morning, week after week, month after month, I never once saw a snake when I was on alms round. I did, however, once see a snake out of the window of my kuti in a small tree, a snake that was yellow and green in color. And when we were having a meal together, I asked the other monks with at that time, my very bad Thai, I said to them, I thought I was saying to them, I saw this snake this morning in the tree outside my window. It was about 1.5 meters long, and it was green and yellow striped. What is it? And they looked at me and laughed and said, what? And I repeated the whole thing again, and they looked very, very puzzled. And then one of them finally worked out that I'd used the word for snake, I'd used the word for mouse instead of the word for snake. So I told them that I'd seen 1.5 meters long, yellow and green striped mouse in the tree outside my kuti, and asked them what kind was it. So in Thailand, people are very, very aware of snakes, and there are many, many deaths caused by snake bite every year in Thailand, especially in the countryside. I remember really very, very well going on a retreat and having to travel on the overnight boat to, this is many, many years ago, before Koh Phangan became what it is today, a tourist trap for full moon parties. I went to do a 3-month retreat, and the boat, there was such terrible, terrible storms. In fact, there was a kind of typhoon going on. The day boat didn't run, but the night boat did. And the night boat you had to crawl inside of, and you couldn't stand up. You had to just lie down, lift yourself up on one elbow, and try not to hit your head on the deck above you. The windows were quite small, and I remember thinking, if this thing were to sink, you'd never get out of it. You couldn't get out through the windows, and you certainly wouldn't be able to swim to one end or the other. And we set off in the darkness. There were quite a lot of passengers on board, all of us lying down like sardines in a can. And the weather got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I, to be perfectly honest, I became terrified, because I thought for sure, as the waves came up and water began to come in through the little tiny windows, and the boat rocked and rolled all over the place, I thought, oh, this will be the end. Because in the pitch black darkness, even if you got out of the boat, you wouldn't know where to swim. this went on for quite a long time, and I became more and more agitated until I reminded myself that I was going to do a retreat. And the whole point well, not the whole point, but a big part of doing a retreat is coming face to face with fear. And so then I reminded myself that while I was rocking and rolling in this boat, that I was on an ocean that was rocking and rolling, and I was on a world that was rolling around in the whole universe, in the whole cosmos. And so by expanding my vision or my view in a very simple way, just reminding myself that I was one tiny spot in the middle of this thing, I was able to let go of that fear, at least temporarily. And although I didn't go to sleep, many people around me slept through the whole thing. I arrived the next morning at the dock, and my teacher's niece was an elderly nun, and she was waiting for me. And when I got off the boat, she said to me, "Oh, Tan, why did you come on the night boat?" She said, "Only last month, a whole lot of people drowned because the boat tipped over." So she took me up to the monastery, which was way up on top of a mountain. And she said, "I'm going to show you your kuti now." I said, "Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much." So we walked around. This monastery is set in jungle, very, very beautiful, very, very high up on the mountain. And she walked me around, and we passed other kutis, and I thought, oh, they look very nice. And then she took me to a kuti that had no front on it, that was like a bus shelter. And out the front of this kuti was an enormously long cobra eating a frog. And I looked at the kuti and I looked at the snake, and I said to her, "This is the kuti?" And she said, "Yes, yes, I thought you'd like this one." So I said, "Yes, okay." I should tell you that the kuti was built on a slope so that the front of the kuti had only perhaps, well, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches off the ground. And the back of the kuti, the ground fell away with a whole lot of rocks underneath it, a perfect place for snakes to hide. So I settled into the kuti, stepping around the snake and setting myself up in this funny little kuti with no front, no door or anything. And it was built like the kuti for the famous Lumpur Wan, who lived up in the northern part of Thailand, who also lived in a sort of what I call a bus shelter kuti with no front door on it. And over the course of many, many days, I saw a lot of cobras, but not once did they come into the kuti, even though it would have been very simple for them to just lift themselves up a tiny, tiny bit and crawl in. Doing walking meditation, I would see the cobras often, and they would always stop at the edge of the walking path and wait for you to go past before they crossed. When I told Mechi Amon about this, she said, "Oh, yes, 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 no one has ever been bitten here, ever, even though the place is crawling with cobras." And I said, "Really? Why is that?" She said, "Because here we practice loving kindness." And then I was reminded of that chant, which tries to send loving kindness to creatures with 4 legs, with 2 legs, with no legs, and so on. Fear was very, very to the fore on that retreat, because the cyclone arrived, the real cyclone arrived a short time later, and Mechi Amon moved me into a different kuti which had a front on it and had a door, she said, so that you won't get wet. The only thing was that that kuti was built, the front part of it was built on the top of a huge boulder which sat out over the mountainside. And you went in through the back of it, which was attached to the ground by some stumps. So when you were inside, if you opened the window, you were looking literally down the mountainside and straight out over the ocean. When the hurricane came, or the cyclone, whatever you call it, the whole kuti rocked backwards and forwards. And behind the kuti was an enormous tree that was also rocking backwards and forwards, but backwards and forwards towards the kuti. So here was another experience of fear, thinking, oh, well, the boat didn't get me, the snakes didn't get me, but maybe the tree will send me cascading down this mountainside. But despite at least a couple of weeks of teeming rain, nothing happened. Why am I telling you this? These are, if you like, ordinary, normal experiences of fear involving things like snakes and like weather and so on. During the lifetime of the Buddha, he also experienced fear before he became the Buddha, before he became enlightened. And we know that because he tells us about it in the suttas. He also tells us what he did to overcome that fear and the skillful way in which he was able to use the fear to, if you like, to make steps on the path to enlightenment. So, you know, we often are fearful of small things, you know, just to take you back a step. When I was going on alms round that first time, I was terribly frightened that I was going to make all sorts of mistakes. That I was going to talk to somebody, because monks are not supposed to talk to someone on alms round, that I might embarrass my teacher by doing something. I was frightened of not being accepted by the locals, that they might think, oh, who's this strange creature? I did make one little girl scream when she came to the gate, and I put my bowl out, and her mum was there, and they actually had a couple of little tiny tin cans like tuna or something, which they put into the bowl. And as the little girl put it into the bowl, I was bending forward, and she looked up and saw my face and just screamed. And I took the tin cans back to the monastery, and somebody ate them. I don't know who ate them, but anyway. And the fear of not knowing what to do or how to act. They're pretty ordinary sorts of fears. But the serpents in that little chant at the very beginning, they're found really throughout the suttas in different forms. They're found especially in Buddhist iconography, and they're found in Hindu iconography, of course, as well. And the main one appears also as one of the four heavenly kings, which you might have seen often represented as statues outside Chinese temples or in paintings. And he is Rupaksha, and he's often shown holding a snake in one hand. And he's regarded as being the leader of all the Nagas, the serpents. By a strange coincidence, I've always kept snakes, even as a small child. I used to go out on weekends and catch them and bring them home. And my grandmother, who was from the country, used to say to me, "Get that snake out of the bedroom. I've told you about this before. They belong in the backyard." So I had a whole lot of enclosures in the backyard with snakes in them. And I've always been fascinated by snakes. Those people who were born on a Saturday in the Thai tradition, their Buddha image is the Buddha with Muchalinda, the snake, curled around the Buddha with his head and hood over the top of the Buddha. So maybe there's some strange connection going on there. Anyway, in the life of the Buddha, we know that the Buddha met the serpent or the Naga Muchalinda after his enlightenment. When Muchalinda came, when there was a huge storm coming, Muchalinda, we're told, coiled around the Buddha 7 times and then arched his hood over the top of the Buddha and said to the Buddha, "Now you'll be protected from rain, from hail, from heat, from flies, from all sorts of things." That's a very interesting story. If you'd like to think about what it might actually mean, not what does it mean for the Buddha, what does it mean for you? You know, what is your Muchalinda? You know? You have a think about it. What is at least one of the things that protects you and keeps you from harm, keeps you from fear? The second really important encounter the Buddha had with a serpent is with one called Naranjana. And this is one, I know people at Sangha Lodge heard me talk about this a few times. This is the one where the Buddha meets another religious practitioner of some sort, and he asks them, this person really hated the Buddha, and he asked this person, can he spend the night in his hut? And this person says, oh, well, you can, but there's a very, very dangerous serpent living in there. And the Buddha says, oh, that's all right, that'll be fine. And so this man acquiesces to the Buddha, and he says, I'll just read it to you. Just let me find it here. When the Buddha goes in, we're told the snake that lived in there blew forth smoke. The Buddha, unperturbed, blew forth smoke too. The chief of the snakes living in that hut, not conquering anger, blazed up like a fire. The Buddha, highly proficient in the condition of heat, blazed up there too. When both were in flames, the matted hair ascetics, as they were looking at the fire room, these are the other religious figures who were watching and hoping that the Buddha was going to be killed by this serpent. They said, oh, he might be beautiful, that's referring to the Buddha, but he's certainly going to be harmed by the serpent that lives in there. At the end of that night, the serpent's flames became extinguished, and the multicolored flames of him of psychic power remained, and multicolored flames, dark green, red, crimson, yellow, crystal colored, were on the serpent's body. Having put the chief of the snakes into his bowl, he showed him to the Brahmin, saying, this Kassapa is your serpent. His heat was mastered by my heat. This is a very strange story, and one that bears a lot of thinking about, a lot of consideration. What does it mean? In the first story, we find the Buddha being protected by something which is poisonous, which is dangerous, especially in India. That's how it was regarded. Also regarded as very, very powerful supernaturally. In the second story, we find a religious practitioner who has, if you like, captured or harnessed one of these nagas, one of these serpents, and has this serpent living in his hut. And when the Buddha asks, can he go in? He says, oh, yes, you can go in, but the serpent will kill you. And instead of that, the Buddha reflects back, just shows back. Whatever the serpent shows him, the Buddha shows it back to him like a mirror. And then finally, the serpent shrinks and the Buddha puts the serpent into his alms bowl, so that the serpent, in a way, becomes metaphorically food for the Buddha. These are two very, very powerful stories. You know, people look at them and think, oh, they're like little kindergarten stories. Yeah. But I'd invite you to think deeply and carefully about how they might apply to you now. Yeah. So what's the dangerous serpent, if you like, that lives inside your hut, that lives inside your heart and mind, but at the same time can become a source of great nourishment and power? Yeah. If you can, if you like, reflect it and not absorb it, not be overwhelmed by it. So in the suttas, there's a lot said about Bhaya, Bhaya meaning fear or danger. Yeah. There are lots of other words used, dread, and my favorite is the word horripilation. Horripilation means that someone is so fearful that all the hair on their body stands on end. And we read in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, the wonderful collection of stories about the nuns the early women disciples of the Buddha, we hear how Mara comes to try to throw each of them off the path. And we're told in each case how his desire is to cause fear and dread and horripilation. So he wants them to be so frightened that their hair stands up, obviously not on their heads because they didn't have any, but on their bodies. And we find also in the suttas other instances where Mara appears and has the same desire to cause this fear to arise in people, because through fear, people abandon their practice. You know, you're familiar, well, most of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the story of the Buddha and his disciple, Megya, who goes off to practice meditation on his own without any help and runs into really terrifying things within himself, hatred and greed and lust and so on, and then comes rushing back to the Buddha. So that's his encounter, if you like, with one of these serpent figures. This experience of Bhaya, or fear, of course, has its opposite in the Buddhist tradition in Abhaya. And you would have seen many images of the Buddha with both hands raised like this in what's called the Abhaya mudra. This is the mudra said to have been used by the Buddha, saying no fear. There is nothing to fear, nothing to be afraid of here. However, most of us are still on the Bhaya side, on the fearful side. We still run into all sorts of things that we're fearful of or afraid of or anxious about. The problem is, of course, that fear is a direct cause of suffering, and becomes, if we don't learn to overcome it or transform it, becomes a really serious obstacle on the path of practice or the path of the Dhamma. The paradox is, though, that it can also become a stimulus to practice if we know how to approach it properly. This idea of fear as a stimulus is found again all through the suttas, and it's found in later teachers like Shantideva, where Shantideva talks about how we should generate a contemplation of, or a constant reminder of, death and impermanence. Now, it's not to make us then become even more fearful, but to help us to see that quality of fearfulness, if you like, or anxiety that's within us. And when the Buddha encourages people to contemplate things like a corpse and so on, it's the same idea. It's not like some sort of morbid fascination. The idea is to bring that thing within one's consciousness and to reflect upon it, and to use it as if you like, an impetus, or as a push forward, to have some vega to move forward in your practice. Of course, this is easier said than done. We need to meet fear instead of running away from it all the time. And most of the time, because fear is a very unpleasant thing, or anxiety, or the experience of horripilation is an unpleasant thing, most of us will try, if we can, to avoid the experience. So I'd like to read now a little passage from the suttas in which a group of monks come to the Buddha and they complain to the Buddha that things are too difficult. The Buddha has encouraged them to go off into the forest, and they come to the Buddha and they say, look, this is it's not really perhaps not such a good idea, or better still, can we change the forest? Can we go somewhere else? We don't like this forest. And the reason is this, and I'll just read this to you now. 500 bhikkhus, remember there are always these wonderful magic numbers in the Buddhist tradition. 500 bhikkhus from Savatthi, after obtaining a subject of meditation from the Buddha, traveled for a distance of 100 yojanas away from Savatthi and came to a very large forest, a suitable place for meditation. However, the guardian spirits of the trees dwelling in that forest thought that if those monks were staying in the forest, it would not be proper for them to live with their families in the trees. So they descended from the trees, thinking that the monks would stop there only for one night. So here we have a lovely example of Indian etiquette at the time of the Buddha, so that even these deities or sort of tree spirits, if you like, recognize that they really should sit lower than the monks, which I think is hilarious. But anyway, and so they come in the story, they come down from the trees and they sit on the ground. Okay? Because they think it would be improper, or mai lep loi, as they say in Thailand. So, and they think, okay, this is only for one night, so we can do it for one night. But of course, the monks have got other plans. And so they sat there and the monks continued to stay for a long, long time. So they decided to frighten away the monks by making ghostly sounds and frightful apparitions. They showed up with bodies without heads and with heads without bodies. It's wonderful, isn't it? The monks were very upset and left the place and returned to the Buddha, to whom they related everything. So here we have a wonderful example of people going to practice meditation and having these strange experiences. Now, I'm sure those of you who practice meditation, you may not have seen a head without a body or a body without a head, but you will have had odd experiences. Right? And you may have even been, if you've gone to a forest monastery to spend any time, or even at Vajrasala in one of those kutis, you might have had this feeling of something, something being not quite right or a little bit anxious and so on. So the monks, 500 of them, they go back to the Buddha and they tell the Buddha what's happened. And on hearing their story, the Buddha tells them that this happened to them because when they went there the first time, they went without any weapon. It's a strange thing to say. And that they should go back there armed with a suitable weapon. So you can imagine the monks might be thinking, what on earth is the Buddha talking about? And then the sutta goes on. So then the Buddha taught them the whole of the metasuta. So that was the weapon. So the Buddha did not say to them, oh, okay, that's all right. Let's move somewhere else, find a more suitable location, move to the Gold Coast or something like that. No, he just said, you didn't have the right equipment when you went. You didn't have the right, if you like, mental framework. And what you need is to have this quality of loving kindness. And that will have a very powerful and beneficial effect on the Devas who are living in those trees. Of course, in the Indian tradition, as is still the case in the Thai tradition, that people believe that these spirits lived in trees. And so, for example, in Thailand, people wouldn't dare cut a tree down without first asking permission and apologizing to the spirit who lives in it. And then they would build, and you would have seen them very often when people build a house, they build what's called a spirit house. What looks like a little house or a little temple standing up on a pole, and they place it at the front because they believe that by cutting the tree down, they've deprived that particular spirit and its family of a place to live, and so they provide a place to live. So it's not just a nice decorative feature. Some people who go to Thailand think, oh, I must buy one of those and bring it home, it would make a great letterbox. No, it serves in the minds and the hearts of the Thais anyway, a very particular purpose. And you'll see people making offerings, placing, little cups of tea and flowers and incense and candles and so on each day, each morning, offering them to the spirit of that place. So the Buddha says, no, you can't go away. You've got to go back, and you've got to go back with the right kind of mindset, the right, if you like, intention within your own heart and mind toward whatever it is that's been terrifying you. So again, I'd encourage you to take that advice of the Buddha, forget about spirits hovering around in trees, and instead think about, okay, what are the things that really disturb me on the path of practice? What are the things that are able to, if you like, put me off? What are the things that make me say, oh, yeah, well, you know, I'll have a little break for a while, a little break that goes for 12 months or something like that. To try to find out what those things are and to bring to bear on them loving kindness. And loving kindness, of course, for yourself, for those around you, and, you know, in the metta chant, of course, we talk about creatures who are seen and unseen. So just because we can't see certain beings doesn't mean that they don't exist. I mean, most of us have never seen bacteria. Most of us have never seen a virus, but we've certainly had to suffer from them. So this is, if you like, the path that the Buddha outlines for them. And so the Buddha's encouraging us to recollect what is fearful in ordinary terms. You know, each of us will have our own fears and worries. And for some people, they suffer greatly from these fears and worries. You know, they develop all sorts of anxieties and all sorts of conditions around those things. Could be some really little thing, or it could be something very, very big. It could be something from the past. It could be something in the present, or it could be something that we're projecting into the future that we're fearful of. You know, what about if this happens? What about if that happens? What about if this person does this or that to me? What about if I do this or that, you know, to somebody else or to myself? So they're what I'd call, if you like, worldly or ordinary fears and anxieties and worries. But then you've got these other ones that I think are more directly related to the path of practice, to the Dhamma, which arise within the heart and mind, and they would be things like, for example, self-doubt in terms of Dhamma practice. They would be things like, if you like, generating skepticism or doubt in the teaching itself. You know, maybe it is, maybe it's not, and so on. Doubt on the path of practice, that is, on the practice of meditation itself. You know, chopping and changing all the time. 1 minute I'm doing this practice, now I'm doing something else. These are all, if you like, triggered by a kind of fearfulness or fear around practice. The greatest one, I think, and you will have your own view on this, but the greatest one, I think, is the fear that practice might work. The fear that practice might actually change me. The fear that I might wake up one morning and find that the old self is no longer there in the bed beside me. You know, I've said this many times to people before. Most people want to become enlightened. You know? Most people want to have citta vimutti, complete freedom of heart and mind, but they want to be there to see it happen. So the old, if you like, to put it in very simplistic terms, the old self loves the idea of enlightenment. Yes, it's a great idea, bring it on, but don't ask me to change anything because I want to be there to see it happening. You know? And of course, underneath that is, I want to be able to control it. So that's also a fear, which very often underlies our practice. So in a way, that kind of fear sabotages ourselves, sabotages our own efforts at practice. So, pardon me while I just move a piece of paper. So, most of the time we want to avoid fear or fearfulness. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that if a tiger rolled into your lounge room tonight, that you just say, "Oh, how nice, a tiger." Yeah. No, there are certain things that you need to be fearful of, in order to protect yourself. Yeah. If suddenly a huge funnel web spider crawls towards you, then you normally, I would think, pardon me, you don't just sit there and say, "Oh, come over here, you're such a cute spider." Or, as we've been doing for many, many, many months now, wearing masks to protect ourselves from COVID-19. Yeah. That's a kind of fearfulness, but it's actually a good fearfulness. Yeah? It may not feel good, but it makes a lot of sense to protect oneself in that way. Looking after your loved ones and your family, and being fearful that something might happen to them. If it's just that, then that's a good thing. If it becomes a neurotic kind of fear, then that becomes something else. It becomes something that's really damaging and dangerous. So the Buddha wants us to, instead of trying to avoid fear or running away from it, he wants us to approach it and to overcome it. And this is where the different methods that the Buddha teaches come into their own. So in order to really overcome fear, we have to be able to, so to speak, enter into it, to come face to face with it, and to find, if you like, where it is arising within us. In the suttas, again, we have lots of examples of the Buddha trying to help people to deal with this fearfulness or this worry. There's another sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 4, the Bhaya Bhairava Sutta on fear and terror. And I'll just read you a little bit from that. In this one, the Buddha is staying at Jeta's Grove, Anathapindaka's monastery. And then a Brahmin goes to the Buddha and says, these sons of good families, they've gone forth from their home into homelessness out of conviction in Master Gautama, that is the Buddha. Is the Master Gautama their leader? Is the Master Gautama their helper? Is the Master Gautama their inspirer? Do they take Master Gautama as their example? And the Buddha's reply is, yes, Brahman, it is so. I am their leader, I am their helper, I am their inspirer. They take me as their example. Now, they're pretty powerful words, I'd suggest to you, especially, again, if we apply them to ourselves, if we stop only thinking about it in historical terms, but ask ourselves, is the Buddha my leader, my helper, my inspirer, and do I take the Buddha as my example? Anyway, that's a question we have to each answer for ourselves. And then the questioner goes on, he says, but Master Gautama, it's not easy to endure isolated forest or wilderness dwellings. It's not easy to maintain seclusion. It's not easy to enjoy being alone. The forests, as it were, plunder the mind of one who has not attained concentration. And the Buddha's answer is, yes, Brahman, it is so. It is not easy to endure isolated forest or wilderness. It's not easy to maintain seclusion, not easy to enjoy being alone. The forests, as it were, plunder the heart and mind of a monk who has not attained concentration. And then the Buddha goes on, it's a very long sutta, the Buddha goes on to tell this questioner how that was his own experience before enlightenment. Yeah, he found it not easy to endure isolation, not easy to live in the forest, not easy to maintain seclusion, not easy to enjoy being alone. So what's he going to do? As I said to you, it is a very long sutta, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. But the Buddha points out that if we examine ourselves, excuse me, and we ask ourselves, am I covetous? That is, am I greedy? Do I have a mind of goodwill? Is my mind overcome by sloth and drowsiness? Do I have a still or a restless mind? Have I gone beyond uncertainty or doubt? Am I given to praising myself and disparaging others? Do I have a heart and mind which tends toward panic and dread? And he actually says, have I gone beyond horripilation? Have I gone beyond the hair standing up on my body? Have I gone beyond being desirous for gains, for offerings, for fame? Have I gone beyond laziness and lacking in persistence? Have I gone beyond being muddled in heart and mind and in my mindfulness? So the Buddha says, you know, if we ask ourselves these questions about our own approach, then we can perhaps see that we need something to help us on the path. We need, first of all, as we're told in the beginning of that sutta, we need to see the Buddha as our leader, as our helper, as our inspirer. And I think that's a really important one, to be inspired by the teaching, to be inspired by the example of the life of the Buddha, and to take the Buddha as our example or as our exemplar, and then try in as much as we can to walk the path of the Buddha without just trying to imitate. Because you might remember there's a wonderful sutta, the Maharahula Awada Sutta, in which the Buddha chastises his own son, who follows behind the Buddha, literally trying to follow in the footsteps of the Buddha. And the Buddha turns around and says, don't think that by imitating me, you can become enlightened. It doesn't work that way. So the Buddha's not asking us to imitate him, but rather to use him as an example to follow his footsteps, but not literally to step into them, so to speak. So then the Buddha goes on and tells us what he would do. Or I'll just read it to you, it's easier. The thought occurred to me, what if on recognized designated nights like the 8th, the 14th and 15th of the lunar fortnight, I were to stay in the sort of places that are awe-inspiring and make your hair stand on end, such as park shrines, forest shrines, tree shrines. Perhaps I would get to see that fear and terror. So notice how the Buddha is actually suggesting that, you know, you don't just turn away from it, but you actually look for it. So he says, perhaps I would see that fear and terror. So at a later time, on recognized designated, nights, such as the 8th, the 14th and 15th, I stayed in those sorts of places. And while I was staying there, a wild animal would come, or a peacock would make a twig fall, or wind would rustle the falling leaves. The thought would occur to me, is this that fear and terror coming? Then the thought occurred to me, why do I just keep waiting for fear? What if I, in whatever state I'm in when fear and terror come to me, were to subdue that fear and terror in that very state? So when fear and terror came to me while I was walking back and forth, that is doing walking meditation, I would not stand or sit or lie down. I would keep walking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until I had subdued that fear and terror. And he goes on with the other postures of meditation, standing, sitting, lying down. So here the Buddha says, unflagging persistence was aroused in me and unmuddled mindfulness was established. My body became calm and unaroused, my mind concentrated and single. Excuse me. When the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, in that moment or those moments, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability, I directed it to the knowledge of past lives and so on. He then goes on to another teaching. And then he finally ends by suggesting that the mind is then turned, having overcome whatever the particular fear is, turned to looking at the origin of suffering itself. Here's another teaching in which the Buddha encourages us to face fear and to use fear as a way of, if you like, overcoming fear and making better progress on the path of practice. So the story of the 500 bhikkhus being told to go back to the forest, but take with them this practice of metta, of loving kindness. The concrete examples of fear encounter, there are many, many, many more than I've given you in the suttas. There's the famous example of Angulimala, the famous story of the man who was a mass murderer and who tried to kill the Buddha, tried to catch up with the Buddha, and the Buddha kept walking, we're told in this sort of miraculous story. And no matter how fast Angulimala ran, he couldn't catch up with the Buddha, even though the Buddha was only walking. And he calls out to the Buddha, stop, stop, why haven't you stopped? And the Buddha, we're told, turns around and says, I have stopped, why don't you stop? There's lots of examples of fear in the suttas if you'd care to read it. But the important thing is to read it and then to turn it, so to speak, within yourself, to read it as though you were placing a mirror in front of yourself, so that you can see, oh, okay, this is the particular fear or fears that I have at the moment, and this is where they're coming from, and this is the overcoming of them. And the use of the metasuta, I think, is, for the Buddha, is terribly important in this regard, because one of the things that fear does is to remove our power, make us helpless, make us crippled, make us feel dejected, and make us feel we can't make any progress. If we use the metasuta and we really try to, if you like, plant the seeds of the metasuta within our own bodies, hearts, and minds, and let it develop, cultivate it, then we can overcome at least that aspect of the fearfulness, which tends towards crippling our efforts, because we can have loving kindness for ourselves. So we can say, oh, well, yes, I'm not very good at this, or I'm not very good at that, or I'm afraid of this, or I'm afraid of that. But I can just look at that. I can apply loving kindness to that, and I can perhaps then let it go or move beyond it, walk past it. So, excuse me. The other thing that's helpful and useful, as the Buddha pointed out in that sutta that I just read to you, is to constantly reflect on the Buddha himself. Recollection of the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha. Not so that you turn the Buddha into some kind of icon, not so that you turn the Buddha into a god, because the Buddha is not a god. Despite what generations of people have done to the Buddha, my own view is I think the Buddha would be horrified by some of the things that people have done. Because the Buddha is not a god, and he makes it very clear when he's asked, are you a deva? And he says, no. And you remember the man says, oh, well, are you this, are you that, are you something else? And then he says to him, are you a man? Are you a human being? And the Buddha says, no. And the man says, well, what are you? And that's when the Buddha gives that really strange reply, I am Tathagata. In the old translation, it was, I'm the thus gone one. But really, it's simpler and perhaps more accurate to say, I'm the one who's not here. In other words, I'm no longer conditioned by these things. Yeah. So these labels no longer apply to me. He's moved beyond them. Excuse me. So I think at that point I might stop. I had a few other things I thought I might read to you, but there's no point. I think that's far too much already. So we might just do a little meditation practice, and then we'll finish, unless you're fearful of finishing. So shall we do some meditation practice? Sadly, with Zoom teaching, you don't get to say anything. And I've made it very clear I can't stand Zoom teaching. So I'm not frightened of it. I just don't like it. I'd rather be in a room full of cobras. So let's do some practice together and maybe have a chance to have a look at maybe one little fear. And I really do want to encourage you, think about those stories, because really our lives are made up of stories. Yeah. Our lives are not made up of theories. Our lives are made up of stories. Our lives are not scientific in that sense. Yeah. Our lives are much more like a story that we're weaving and is being woven for us by our interaction with others. And those stories in the suttas, they belong to us. They're not just some sort of historical document or some sort of religious document. If they're going to be of any value, of any benefit, then we have to bring them into ourselves and we have to find where they speak within us. So I'd really encourage you, have a think about that wonderful image of Muchalinda, the great serpent who suddenly appears when the Buddha needs him. This creature who would normally be very dangerous. You think about in the Western tradition, the cajuses, that used to be used by doctors, the staff with the two snakes coiled around it as a symbol of healing. So Muchalinda, in a way, is acting in the same way. He's become, instead of being something which is fearful, he's become something that actually protects the Buddha. And if we can find what the Muchalinda is within us, then we can help the Muchalinda within us to become something that protects us. If we've got the other kind of snake, the snake that sets fire to itself within us, then by mirroring, that is by not reacting, but simply mirroring what it's doing. And that creates a lovely sort of distance, a lovely gap. In the same way that, if someone's attacking you, if you don't really respond, then in a strange way, you're actually disarming them. Anyway, look, it's I'm sure you get the drift. But I'd love you to at least take away from this evening more determination to enter into those stories and to look for those things within yourself, and not just outside, not with a particular teacher, not with a particular book, not with a particular monastery, but to find it within yourself. And that way, it'll be of great benefit and blessing to you and to everyone that you come into contact with. So let's try to do a little meditation practice, something very simple. And who knows, you might run into a serpent or something. Or you might find you're not afraid anymore. Anyway, let's see. Kayanuwa wate tasawa bude kukamang pagatang mayang buddha padigan tuan chian tang kalantare samwaritung wa pute. Kaina wa wache tasawa dame kukamang pakatang mayang damo patigan tuan chian tang kalantari samwari tung wat dame. Kaina wa wache tasawa sange kukamang pakatang mayang sango patigan tuan chian tang kalantari samwari tung wat sange. That little chant says, put very simply, before we do our practice, I call to mind all of the unwholesome, unskillful things, the things that I've done, the things that I haven't done. I call those to mind. I place them in front of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and I make an effort now to leave them behind and not to go back to them again as I enter into my practice. So let yourself settle in whatever way you normally do for your meditation practice. Try to let your body gently settle, however you're sitting. I know it's awkward when you're sitting at a desk or something, looking at a computer, but just gently let yourself settle. Let the breath and the body really begin to speak to each other, begin to flow into each other. So that you can feel the breath without concentrating. You can be aware of the body without concentrating. And you have the whole experience of this body, this breath, this body. And entering into your practice, at least for these few minutes, you can perhaps remind yourself that the Buddha is your leader, that the Buddha is your helper, he's your inspirer, and he's your example. Entering into your practice. So with great loving kindness, you can just let other things go. Let other things fall away from you. Remind yourself that the intention of the Buddha is to be your helper, is to assist you, is to aid you, is to help you walk on the path to complete freedom of heart and mind. Without ignorance, without greed, without hatred and delusion. That the life of the Buddha is example, that little example I gave you tonight of the Buddha explaining how he also experienced fear, how he came across fear, but how he overcame it using determination and staying with his practice. The way that the Buddha treated other people, his teaching on loving kindness, his concern for others, that the Buddha is your inspiration. as you put your foot down this evening on the path of practice. And just resting into that gentle awareness of the body and the breath. You've given up trying to force anything. You've given up trying to control anything. Rather, you're resting into the present moment. And that present moment is already gone. So you're resting into the next present moment. And the next, and the next, and the next. So you're resting into the flow of anicca, into the flow of impermanence, but without any fear. Enter into your practice, calling to mind a wonderful teaching in the Chinese Buddhist tradition. If you want to enter into your practice, you should take compassion as your throne, compassion as your cushion, loving kindness as your cushion, and the emptiness of all things as your robe. So in this wonderful and wonderfully simple way, you're already on the path. The path, in the words of the Buddha, ekayano, the path that only goes in one direction, toward the complete freedom of heart and mind. And as you float on anicca, on impermanence, with each breath, with each awareness of the body and the breath, if anything arises which you find causes anxiety or fear or doubt or worry, just acknowledge that thing and allow it to also flow away. Allow it to be swept along with impermanence, with anicca. And as you rest paradoxically on the path of practice, which you're moving on, try to generate within your own heart and mind that quality of loving kindness, that quality of metta. And you use whatever, whatever method or whatever form of practice you normally use. So if it's words, if it's a formula, then use that until they fall away. If it's simply the awareness of the presence of this quality within your own heart and mind, then let yourself become aware of that. But make sure that metta is flowing in both directions, not simply out toward others and the external world, but also flowing within your own body, heart, and mind. And may metta help me to overcome and to dissolve fear, fearfulness, worry, and anxiety. May metta, may loving kindness help me to transform my fears, my worries, my anxieties for myself and others. As we come to the end of our little practice together, we call to mind the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dhamma, the qualities of the Sangha, remembering that in the chant, which we do on a daily basis, the iti piso, the Buddha says, I call this, that is these words, the mirror of the Dhamma. And he asks Rahula, what is a mirror for? Rahula says, for looking into, for seeing what's there. So these qualities of the Buddha, qualities of the Dhamma, qualities of the Sangha are within each one of us. And when we experience fear or dread, with loving kindness, may we be able to embrace it, soften it, hold it as we might our wounded self. So with gratitude to the Buddha, gratitude to each other, gratitude to our long, long line of teachers, going back to the time of the Buddha, we bring our practice to a close. Yata varivahapura paripurinti sagarang ewang me wangitodinang petanang upakapati chitang paditang tunghang kipamewa samitutu sabe purintu sankapa chantopanara soyata mani jatira soyata sapitio haviva chanto saparoko vena satuma deva wawan tarayo sukiti kayuko hawa abiwa danasili sanichang wutang pachay hinoja taro dhamma vatanti ayuwano sukang balang bhavatu sabha mangalang rakantu sabha devata sabha buddha nupahvena sada soti bhavantu te bhavatu sabha mangalang rakantu sabha devata sabha dhamma nupahvena sada soti bhavantu te bhavatu sabha mangalang rakantu sabha devata sabha sankano bhavena sada soti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
But have good dreams tonight, and if you meet any snakes in your dreams, may they be good. And yeah, if you meet a snake in your dream, usually it means some sort of healing. But anyway, that's a whole other area. So thank you very much, everyone. And thanks to Sarah and Meredith for looking after things. So good night from me.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you.
Good night from him.
Thank you.